and it certainly isn't, as I suppose, the great man school of history. So the other courts, the quarter sessions, again, are, I suppose, to say police courts are magistrates courts, so it's local judges. They're not professional, they don't have to have a law degree, just like magistrates today in the UK. It's lay magistrates. Often in Ireland they're led by what's called a resident magistrate, who does have some legal training. Often they're kind of ex-army officers as well. And then up to the assizes, and the assizes will be where a murder case is heard. Okay, so as things get more severe, if you like, in terms of the type of crime, they move up the chain in terms of the courts. So if you're looking for serious crime in your area, you're looking at the assizes, and they only meet twice a year. The quarter sessions meet 4 times a year. Each court, just as today, can bump up a case, so to speak. So if the magistrates at the police court don't like it or feel it's outside of what they could potentially do, they can ask the quarter sessions to look at it. Likewise, the quarter sessions can ask the assizes to look at it. The assizes are run by judges, so legally trained people who have been barristers, and they are the ones who are trying the very serious cases. So you're looking in, now again, in terms of theft, it's not always dealt with in something like the police court or quarter sessions. If the theft is deemed serious enough, it will, in value terms, it will be dealt with in the assizes. So PRONI has most of the assizes, I think, for Northern Ireland. So you have a huge rich vein of primary material here on site for you to go through, and we're going to look at a few cases before the assizes later on in the talk. So essentially these are the primary court structure in an area. The lower down the crime you're looking at magistrates courts. The more serious the crime that you want to look at from a history point of view, you're looking up at the other courts. This is just an example of the kind of statistical returns that you will see in an area. And this is for Armagh in 1893. And it's sort of, you can see the list of offences and they're on your sheet as well. It's the first, the top one, the return of male criminals tried at assize courts by the Crown and Peace for Armagh, or by the Clerk of the Crown and Peace for Armagh, okay? And you'll see the sort of, so that's what it looks like. I've just extracted some things from it here to sort of make it a little bit clearer, and then just explain the nature of the crimes. And one of the things that you will find is that the lists of crimes alter over time. And so what are considered crimes in later periods are not, or the levels of seriousness can change. But one of the interesting points, they obviously separate out murder of infants, infanticide, from other murders. And they have obviously conspiring to murder as a charge. All of these are what you would be essentially charged with. So shooting, wounding and stabbing, manslaughter, attempts to procure a miscarriage, concealing the births of infants, sodomy and bestiality, attempts to commit unnatural misdemeanours. I couldn't find I presume that's a kind of an all-encompassing one they can throw at you. And then rape and indecent assault. What is, I suppose, interesting here is that if you look at the crimes, and we're going to look at the case later on, murder of infants is separated out, but also attempts to procure a miscarriage and concealing the birth of infants, as 3 serious crimes. So this is a list of serious crimes, and we all see them there: murder, rape, manslaughter. So 3 of them relate, if you like, to potentially women having children, or the results of maybe an unwanted pregnancy. So, I mean, it's one of the things I want to say again, is that the crime and policing records are obviously useful if you're doing the history of crime and policing in your area. But they will provide you with a lot of other information outside of that, in particularly, and I suppose looking at this list alone, the kind of social attitude towards women and fertility and the control of pregnancy, essentially. So those are a list of some of the crimes. Move on to defilement of girls under 13. And the terminology is obviously, of course, changes over time. They look to unlawful prior knowledge of girl under 13 or 14. So defilement of girls between 13 and 16. And of course, in the earlier periods, I mean, an age of consent really isn't defined until, I think, after the first third of the 19th century or something. It's relatively open up to that. We appear to have lost our screen, have we? So the other ones there were essentially an older crime, the crime of abduction, which is a real 18th century crime. Someone's abducting the local heiress, and then ending up marrying her or whatever. It's not kidnapping per se. Well, it is kidnapping, but you know what I mean. It's not. It's a separate kind of offence. Bigamy obviously remains and is still an offence. And another offence, which is child stealing. And child stealing, of course, is just. I mean, it's kidnapping offence, just like abduction. Then there is another offence, which is the unlawful abandoning of children under 2 years old. And that may strike us as sort of strange, but one of the things that they show is that they show a particular light on society. In that, when I was doing history as an undergraduate and we were doing medieval history, and our medieval history professor was explaining that there was the rules of a monastery, right, in medieval Italy or wherever, in medieval France. And you will have a rule in the monastery saying the monks will not get drunk and bring prostitutes into the monastery, right? And thereby, some enterprising monk had got drunk and brought prostitutes into the monastery, okay? Because otherwise there wouldn't be a rule against it. Because, it happens the first time and then there's a rule, right? You're not to do that anymore. Or else, having failed to actually find it in your conscience not to do that kind of thing, we'll make a formal rule. So abandoning children, and there is a lot of child abandonment in Ireland in the 19th century. And it's sad to say, it's a lot of people, even if they're going to America and they're immigrating, they actually drop kids off at the local workhouse. And they go to America leaving kids behind, or one kid behind. Okay? And there were cases of that up to the almost 1930s, of people just dumping a kid before they went to the States. So, because it's there as an offence and as a serious offence, we know it's happening. Children are abandoning people, and of course there are legal penalties for doing it. Oddly, it's again mainly targeted at women, because if it's a fallout with kids, chances are he'd be made to give them up to the workhouse as a man not being able to take care of them or whatever. But that is again class orientated and kind of socially orientated towards certain groups. So again, the other thing as well is in endangering the safety of passengers on railways. Presumably that means not letting their cattle run up and down the railway line or other things. So it's a specific offence because there was a sort of paranoia about the safety of railways. And I suppose, we look at Argentina over the last week, and potential casualties that can result. But, people, it was there as a specific offence. Assaults and inflicting bodily harm, common assaults on peace officers. So generally, constables, special constables, or anyone charged with kind of bailiff duties, and so on. The joke is that, of course, that there's always 100% detection rate for an assault on police officers. They pretty much know who's after hitting them. So again, all of these sort of serious crimes are dealt with in the assizes, even though as well assaults are dealt with in the magistrates courts. It depends on the nature of it, and it's one of the things that you get used to over time, that you will it's it kind of case illustrates it as well, the things we're looking at, that it depends on the severity of the thing. It can depend on who's been assaulted. Two guys who are kind of constantly up before the magistrate court have a fight outside a pub, chances are it won't go any further than the magistrate's court. If your local stockbroker is going down the street and gets beaten up, chances are the person who did it ends up in the assizes. Okay, so there are those elements, and it's one of the tricky things to try and take apart in these kind of records. So again, this is the people who were. How many of these events effectively happened in Armagh in 1893? So there were 2 people charged with conspiring for murder. Obviously didn't succeed. 13 attempts of shooting, wounding and stabbing. 3 manslaughters. 2 indecent assaults. 13 common assaults and 1 assault on a police officer. So nobody in Armagh charged with unnatural misdemeanors in 1893. So you get a sense of, one of those things that are useful, you get a sense in time of a pattern of crime emerging in an area. And if something is different, it allows you then to follow up on what has changed. So if the criminal statistics change, it could be just a more efficient head constable in an area. It could be a head constable that targets different things. So it's useful to track back into people's service records as well and their own backgrounds. But if you're looking at your own area, you will get a good sense of using these to build up a pattern. And you can see there that it doesn't look like there's a lot of violent crime. I don't know, maybe 1893 is a quiet year in Armagh, but it's generally in Ireland you really only get a lot of violent crime around agrarian outbreaks in rural areas. You start to get a different type of crime as well in urban areas from the 1860s, 70s, 80s on, as people become second or third generation cities and to kind of break away from rural backgrounds, and you get the emergence of kind of an urban criminal class. So it's a bit different, and again that's reflected in some of the judgments of the kind of memoirs of people who were in the prison system, that they find that the kind of much more hardened criminals emerging in the late 19th century and from the urban environment rather than the rural environment. So again, just to sort of explain some of the things that you'll find, they keep a list of what happens obviously in the assizes. So an acquittal is obviously, you're not going to be sent to jail. But it's not just, they don't just record a not guilty verdict. So when you're going through these records as well, the first one is no bill found. So that just means no case to answer. So it was just decided the person didn't have a case to answer before the court. Okay? Bailed, not tried. So in other words, in their first appearance, the judge perceived, or the magistrate thought there might be a case, but ultimately it didn't go forward. And there can be a variety of reasons. It could be the prosecutors don't go forward, the police generally don't go forward. And then not guilty, it's obviously gone to trial, and the person has been found not guilty.